PodcastCoug Season 3, Episode 5.
You're listening to the PodcastCoug Radio Network with your host, James Laurie. The PodcastCoug is your weekly Coug On Demand show featuring all things Cougs and Washington State Cougar football. And now, here is your host, PodcastCoug.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the PodcastCoug. I am James Laurie, the PodcastCoug, and you are listening to the PodcastCoug, where all things are Cougar football, 30 minutes of Coug talk. We're going to talk about our previous game against Utah and our upcoming game against the Oregon State Beavs. It was Utah and homecoming, and Easop Winston, who caught the football over his shoulder, made a couple of sweet moves to dodge a defender and completed an 89-yard touchdown pass that lifted Washington State to a 28-24 victory over the Utah Utes last Saturday. Again, homecoming, our 10th home game of the in a row that we won. Winston said he could hear the roar in the crowd, and he caught the pass late in the fourth quarter, and he just had one thing on his mind, and that was, he said, I got to get in the end zone. Just get in the end zone, right? Here we are. University of Utah fell. Huge heartbreaker at Martin, 28-24. The Utes are 0-2 in Pac-12 play. Cougs 4-1. Almost 5-0 with that USC game. Utah held a 3-point lead heading into the final 5 minutes of the fourth quarter, but the Cougs completed that Easop 89-yard pass on the second play of the drive that led eventually to win the game. Even though the Utes were able to hold off Washington State to 0 rushing yards, the Cougs we still put up, 445 passing yards, and the Cougs picked up their first Pac-12 win of the season, moved to 4-1, while Utah dropped 2-2 and 0-2 in Pac-12 play. And by the way, BYU, the other Cougs, actually the Cougars, I should say BYU. Those guys are not the Cougs, right? I'm talking about BYU because Washington beat BYU. We beat the Utes. So the entire state of Utah, right, was lost to the state of Washington. And did you see that poster on that Husky game? It said "Go Cougs." I've never seen a BYU poster or anywhere at Brigham Young that references their Cougars as Cougs. So they're copying us. We're the Cougs, right? The Houston are the Cougars, and the BYU are the Cougars, and we're the Cougs. So here you go. so anyway, 4-1. Utah is 0-2 in Pac-12 play. Minshew threw 445 yards, 4 touchdowns, 1 interception. Winston, Desmond Patton each topped 100 yards, and each had a touchdown. Kyle Sweet just had 59 yards, but most of those 6 catches were at critical times. So good going, Kyle Sweet. And it was Winston who would make the biggest play of the game after a strong first half. Cougs, offense struggled big time in the second half, just gaining 72 yards. And on its first 4 drives, Utah didn't do much better, actually, though. They were able to muster a field goal after their first drive to break away to take a 24-21 lead deep in the fourth quarter. There's Zach Moss, finished only 106. Well, he had pretty good, 106 yards for Zach Moss. Quarterback Tyler Huntley performed below average and really not to his potential. They really have issues on their whole offense and quarterback. Coach Kyle Whittingham, again, his name's coming up quite a bit. He always brings a good defense every year, a stout defense, great defense. He just hasn't put anything together offensively over these years, especially a good quarterback. Or an exceedingly great quarterback. So a lot of guys are talking about Kyle and his future. Of course, that's normal. You lose, you're going to do that. I don't care who it is or what program or what level of football. Winning solves everything, right? So, the contrast from the second half to the first half was absolutely stunning. The first half was a total shootout, right? The weirdest possible way. The Cougs passed the ball 37 times and ran it for 3. Utah passed the ball 5 times and ran it for 30. So it was just the opposite. Two teams showed that there's more than one way they want to go, and piling up both of them. 500 yards between both of them, including 286 yards through the air for Washington State and 154 on the ground for Utah. Heading to the locker room, 21-21, what a tie ball game, despite having tremendous difficulties stopping Utah's running game for most of the half. The Cougs forced a punt by the Utes with just over 2 minutes to go, giving the Cougs a chance to take lead before the break. Washington State moved the ball a bit, but missed massive opportunities to get the field goal range, to get into field goal range when Jamar, Calvin, Travel Harris, and Peyton just each had drop passes on the drive. There were lots of drop balls. I mean, one after another, right? Second half couldn't have been more different. Utah got the ball first and was able to drive into Washington State's territory before setting up a 41-yard field goal, and the Cougs responded the next drive, moving to the Utah 35, settling for a field goal attempt, but was blocked for the second consecutive week. Are you kidding me? Utah retained its lead 24-21, 7 consecutive punts followed, and of course our offense struggled mightily. The Cougs were just plagued by more drop balls. I mean, it was amazing, and Minshew was just right on. His passes were really good, and they're catchable. His balls are really catchable. So Utah brought blitzes more frequently, but both seemed to affect Minshew's willingness to throw the ball decisively, and Utah just had lost they lost their center to injury, and their offensive coordinator Troy Taylor seemed to just run out of ideas, and that's when Winston did his thing. The Cougs defense did their thing, and Winston did his things, and Washington State had their 10th straight consecutive win at Martin Stadium, 10 in a row at Martin. Aesop's an 89-yard catch touchdown just shows how far Washington State has come under CML. I mean, it's been really we've come a long ways. So first off, let's take another look at the play in which Winston singled out up against their corner, Julian Blackman, widely recognized as the best that the Utes have to offer, and Cougs backed up. They really backed it up. Utah goes with a single high safety and floods and underneath routes and 4 defenders, and total advantage was Aesop Winston, and Gardner Minshew just broke out tough second half to deliver a gorgeous ball. I mean, it was just amazing. So really makes the play, of course, and moves Winston. He just makes catching the pass, turning around safety Corian Ballard, and before outrunning him to the end zone. I mean, it was just beautiful. It was gorgeous. Seriously, how far has our program gone? Aesop is just one of multiple receivers on our roster that's literally able to do the same thing, right? Just pick any one of them. And against one of the best defenses in the country, that literally speaks volumes. So Winston finished 115 yards and, of course, just the 1 TD. Hey, we're going to be right back, and we're going to talk about Oregon State, the Beavs, next, right here on the Podcast Coug.
Hey, Coug fans. You're podcasting with James Laurie and the Podcast Coug Radio Network. The Podcast Coug is your weekly Coug on Demand show, featuring all things Cougar football in Washington State. To help you get through the week, hit the subscribe button or check us out on iTunes, the App Store, iOS, Google Play, Stitcher, or at PodcastCoug.com.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the second half of the podcast Coug. I'm James Laurie. We got Oregon State in Corvallis on Saturday night, Pac-12 Network. It's always great to be in Corvallis. Love the town. That's one of my favorite college towns. So pretty, beautiful down there. Interesting, 5-hour drive from Seattle. If you're on the west side, 5 hours Seattle, 5 hours Eugene. Corvallis, Eugene, and Pullman are all 5 hours. Go choose your battle. Very beautiful down there. And although they continually struggle on the football, right? And we'll talk about that in a moment. Oregon State, Washington State, it's our 103rd meeting between Washington State and Oregon State. Second most for the Beavers, you're right. Their primary, they've got 121 meetings with their Civil War, which is their rival Oregon. So 121 games against Oregon and 103rd with Washington State. So we're the second highest opponent number of times we've met. So, we've got a slim advantage, basically, on the series. 52-47 and three ties. 52 and 47. Teams are tied literally in Corvallis, 23 apiece. That's interesting. So both have won 23 in Corvallis. Washington State has won the past 4 games, and it's been really, really good down there lately. So Oregon State program has been on a steady decline since 12, right? It's 2012 when the Beavers won 9 games, and Oregon State suffered through one of the worst seasons in more than 2 decades as the Beavers continue to just go on a downward slide, right? I mean, it's just, I feel sorry for those guys. They used to be a basketball school, kind of in the 80s, the old school. They were, the old school days. In the 80s, they were a basketball school and just the doormat of the Pac-10. And it would, just very sad. Just would lose and lose and lose. Lose and lose and lose and lose and lose and lose on football. But basketball, they were pretty good. And then, of course, Arizona came up over the years. Of course, UCLA. But I just feel, I'll talk more about Oregon State in a little bit here. But there's hope for their program. It comes to the new coach, Jonathan Smith. There's always hope when you have a new coach. There's always hope, Former Oregon State quarterback. He's looking to really build up the program. He's got a Bear cupboard, and he's just looking to win. And he's trying to transform it, being patient. Jonathan Smith, his first season, he's 1-4, 0-2 in Pac-12 play, and last year they were 1-11 and 0-9. Didn't even win a conference game in the Pac-12. Last in the North, of course. Looking back, the program appeared to be making headway following the 4-win season in 2016. But after a 1-5 start, Gary Anderson announced he was leaving the program. He forfeited a $12 million contract that was owed to him in his current contract. And he left they left that interim coach, Corey Hall, through the remainder of the season. I was a big believer in Corey Hall because I saw on the sidelines the players really reacted to Corey Hall, Coach Corey, and I was really hoping that Corey would get the head coach job because I really think the players were responding to Corey. They weren't responding, in my observation, to Gary Anderson. So Corey Hall didn't get it. And I don't know where. I have not checked where Corey Hall has landed, so don't know where he is. Maybe he's still down in Corvallis, but school moved quickly. Of course, they hired Jonathan Smith in the off season. Smith spent he's got 3 seasons under Chris Peterson at Washington as offensive coordinator, and he's been over at Idaho for a long time. So, he's very familiar. Jonathan's very familiar with the Palouse and the Cougs, and having played them 4 times in the AC, and I don't know how many times he's played them as a Vandal. So he knows our program really well. Beavers are making a switch actually from a spread offense to a more pro-style look, quicker tempo. And, he's an offensive coordinator guy, so he's got a lot on his plate as the first-year head coach. So quarterback Jake Luton started the first 4 games last season before suffering a season-ending injury against Washington State frankly, on September 16th of last year. He finished 1-3, a 1-3 record with 880 yards for a total offense. And he joins junior quarterback transfer Jack Coletto and Connor Blunt, competing the run offense to run the offense this season for Oregon State. So the Beavers featured one of the best pass protections in the Pac-12 last season, allowing just 18 sacks last year. So this is interesting, 4-down territory, 2 teams lead Pac-12 in 4-down conversions. Both of them, right? Washington State leads the conference in the Pac-12 for fourth down conversions. We've got literally out of 15, we've got 12 out of 15. That's staggering. And Oregon State is second at 8 and 11. So Oregon State is just one of 2 teams in our league with more first down rushing yards, 55 first down rushing than passing. So that's interesting. Jonathan Smith, coach, says he's has a ton of respect for our program and what Leach has been able to do with the air raid, and so he's got a lot of respect, of course, for what although he's beaten us every time he's played under Peterson, just about. So, yeah, and he played quarterback for Oregon State back in the day. So, he says stopping Washington State offense will be a great challenge. Are you kidding me? Of course it will be. We can score. He's very familiar with what Coach Leach has done offensively, and he says we don't run a lot of different plays or patterns. They just do a ton of adjustments in the routes, and they're running it at the line of scrimmage. So he's pretty impressive to watch. He says, it's a lot of accuracy, not a lot of deep passes. So he says the thing is tough to stop when they're in a rhythm, really tough. When we get in that rhythm, I think it's important that Oregon State continues to change up their looks. They're going to try to blitz. They're not going to blitz. They are going to blitz. They're going to change it up on the coverage and try to keep us guessing. So Washington State features the number 1 passing attack in the Pac-12, and Minshew leads the country in passing yards per game and 8th in passing touchdowns. Minshew is rated number 5 overall quarterback in the country. Best Pac-12 quarterback, rated 3rd best deep passer in the country, 2nd in the Pac-12, rated the country's 6th best passer while under pressure, and best under pressure in the Pac-12. So currently his numbers are 5 games that are the 2nd best under Leach. And although through the first 5 games, it's only been Connor Halliday that's had better numbers in 2014. So meanwhile, Oregon State, their defense has struggled, and that's significantly. They have really struggled to stop most of the opponents this season. Going into Saturday's game, the Beavs are last in the Pac-12 in 3 of the 4 major defensive categories. That's scoring defense, rushing defense, and total defense, and next to the last in passing defense. So overall, Oregon State is averaging about 45 points per game and 543 yards per game. So not great. They are allowing the most first downs of all Pac-12 teams in our league, and they have a trouble of stopping opponents on third down conversions. I mean, literally, they're just having a hard time with their defense. So, what really should we be concerned about Oregon State? Simple, 2 words. Jamar Jefferson. He's a freshman running back, and he leads the Pac-12 in rushing. Currently, he's went off to 254 yards against Oregon State. Nice game against Oregon State. So they don't do a lot of things well, but literally Jamar Jefferson is the one to watch and contain. So Jonathan Smith, is he the right guy for the program? This is what I want to talk to you about. Is he going to be able to recruit the right talent? There's a big thread on Wisely Watch about one of our new posters is just real excited about Jonathan Smith, thinks that he's going to turn around the program for Oregon State, that Jonathan Smith is going to be the guy to turn around Oregon State. Now, with all due respect, all right, Beavers are a cool team. Corvallis is one of the best college campuses around. Just a group. That Willamette Valley is just beautiful. Absolutely, especially this time of year, right? Who can turn around Oregon State? Who can? Could Mike Leach do it? Could Mike Leach just go in there and start turning things around? It's going to take a special guy. Is Jonathan Smith the right guy? Is he really? Of course, it's a little too early. He's got a Bear Cup board. He can't just continue. He just can't immediately start competing now. Are the players playing for him? I think it takes an extraordinary leader to literally bring 2-star, 3-star recruits, especially 2-star recruits, up a notch and believe in themselves. So a lot of it is skill, really a lot is talent and skill, but a lot of it is also believing in yourself, believing in your team, believing in your players and the team. And can he get it done? I mean, or is he just there to collect a paycheck until they bring in the next replacement? I personally think that very few people in this country would be able to get that, would be able to turn around Oregon State. I'm crazy to believe there's another thing that needs to be done. It sounds crazy. You probably won't agree with me. Now, can Nick Saban go in there and change things? Absolutely. If Nick Saban showed up next, in the spring as head football coach of Oregon State, I totally believe that Nick Saban would turn the program around in a couple of years. No question about it. He would just be bringing in some great guys because players are going to want to play for Nick Saban. He's going to recruit and bring him in. And just like there's a lot of players that want to play for Mike Leach. Mike Leach is a legendary, literally becoming a legendary coach all over the United States, not just with air raid, but just with reputation and, just a great program. And you got to have that sort of big name to bring in recruits. And I don't think Jonathan Smith is the right guy, personally. Who am I to, I can't, we'll see what happens. Now, what I would do if I was running Oregon State, I would literally change their logo and their beaver logo. It just reeks losing. We've seen this logo for 50 years. They've been losing football games after football games after they lose. They were they're 0-11 or 0-12. Come on. Why not have roll out a fresh image? That's a lot to do to change a logo because you've got 100 years of that logo. But if it's not working, go hire somebody and get a better brand, better package, do a full restart. And I think that has a little bit to do with it. Do you really want to go back to the scripted helmet for Washington State? I don't. I know a lot of guys that do. I know a lot of guys, hey, let's wear our scripted helmets in the AC. I am totally against the scripted helmet. That reminds me of the 70s and 80s when we were excited to compete against UCLA and USC. Okay, we were excited to compete against the Pac-10 teams. Not necessarily win, but just hang in there. That's not good enough. You need to have something, a whole new brand, a whole new makeover. And you got to have the right people on the right bus, and you got to get the right guys, and you got to get somebody that just totally motivates instead of happy with complacent. If you look at Jonathan Smith's press conference, he is complacent. Boy, that's a tough thing to say. I think I would say, guys, I'm not happy. You need to do better, okay? This is not acceptable. And just somehow get those guys to push them to a higher level skill and talent, and then do a full rebranding of that program. And then Oregon State might eventually start bringing some kids in that can compete. Now, how would they lose? Or excuse me, how would they beat Washington State if we don't show up? If we just go in there like and think we're just going to show up and win the game, we could be in a very big surprise, because those bees might be so fired up, and we're sitting there thinking we're just going to show up, roll off the bus, and it's going to be 54-14, and that's not going to happen. I mean, it might happen, but you just can't just assume that's going to happen. So watch out. Is it a trap game? No, I don't believe it's a trap game. It is a potential for a trap game, but I don't think Saturday's a trap game. I just think we've got just better players all around, especially, well, on both sides of the ball, offense and defense. We're clearly far better. So not a problem for Saturday. I just more concerned about the Oregon State program on the future, and maybe they're going to end up being a baseball school and a basketball school, and that's just the way things are, right? Hey, that's all we have for this episode of the Podcast Coug. We're going to catch you in 2 weeks, right? 2 weeks. Next week is the bye. It's University of Bye. We're going to catch you 2 weeks from now. Until then, have a great game day on Saturday, and go Cougs.
You've been listening to the PodcastCoug Radio Network with your host, James Laurie. The PodcastCoug is your weekly Coug On Demand show featuring all things Cougs and Washington State Cougar football. This has been a presentation of the PodcastCoug Radio Network. Find us at PodcastCoug.com.
N-G-T-O